Hey everyone, Sean Allison back here. Got another Jetty video. This one is going to be specifically about Jetty spurs. Some of you guys may not know what the spurs are, so that's kind of what this video is going to address. The underwater structure at the jetties and some stuff a lot of people generally just don't know when they go out there. So I've already got a picture up here. This is from the Army Corps Engineers schematic. This was just a black and white drawing. I've actually gone in and kind of colorized it with paint, marked where the ship channel is. The brown parts are the jetty above water. The green parts are the rock underwater. I've kind of added the channel markers there. But this does show distances between the spurs being the little arms that point inwards toward the channel off of the jetty. There's 4 on the south jetty, 3 on the north jetty, but it shows the angle that they're pointed at. They're all on the south jetty are pointed seaward. The first one being 30 degrees, the other 2 being 60 degrees. There is one just before the apron as well. I guess you can count that one as well. North jetty, they kind of just point straight out toward the channel. Distance between them varies. Again, you can zoom in on the photo here and kind of get those distances. This is where the little placards that Army Corps engineer puts on the jetty at certain distances. You can kind of use those walking out on the jetty to judge where you're at and use this schematic here and know about where these spurs are at. I kind of know where they're at. The first one on the when I speak in generalities here, I'm talking about the south jetty. Don't normally dive the spurs on the north jetty. I would rather dive the beach side over there. But when I'm diving South Jetty and I'm diving the channel, I'm trying to be on the spurs. That's where a lot of the fish are at. But the first one is right across from where you would park your vehicle, almost right where the beach meets the jetty there. The second one is right at or just past that green channel marker buoy. You can see out there very easily in the channel. Then the last 2 down there a little further down. They're a little harder to spot, but if the current's ripping pretty good, you can tell by the action on the surface where those spurs are at, because it kind of tends to cause the water to boil up on itself. Moving inland from there, you can see UTMSI Octagon. That's University of Texas Marine Science Institute. They have a little pier back there. It's not something you can go onto the pier. It's like a little research facility thing, and they've got probes in the water on the end of this pier doing research, so on and so forth. But it's structure in the water. I do dive back there sometimes. There's lots of sheepshead on those pylons and whatnot. Now, back near that octagon and to the left of where it says parking tends to be relatively shallow. Some of that is like 10 to 12 feet down near the octagon. But as you come kind of past the line that runs across the channel that says 1,500 feet, about there it starts to become big rubble, and it starts to get deeper, about 40 foot, until you run into that first spur. That's right across from where the beach meets the jetty. Most of this video will be related to this first spur, the one right across from the beach. Park, get out, jump in the water right on the other side of the jetty. You're almost right on top of that spur. The spurs do contain quite a bit more fish than the rest of the jetty because they're out there a little bit deeper. It's almost out of casting range, so the fish are pretty pristine out there, and they're not as spooky as they are up close to the jetty. Free diving would be very difficult out here. Visibility is so limited at the jetty. Depth on top of the spur once you're out there is about 30 feet. Potentially you could free dive on it. 30 feet is not super deep. The problem is you can't just be swimming on the surface that far out from the jetty. The current's just going to rip you away. Plus, you'll never know when you're directly over the spur and you're swimming down to try to be on top of the spur. There's a fair chance that you won't even be on top of it when you make your dive. So that's just pretty problematic. So this is pretty much scuba related. But again, in this area here that I have highlighted in the red box, this is going to be the area that we're going to be covering specifically in this video. So we'll kind of move to a diagram that kind of zooms us in so we can talk about that a little bit more specifically. All right, moving into this little, sorry for my artistry here, I just kind of went on paint and just kind of scratched this out real quick. It's not perfect, but it'll get the point across for what we're doing here. So this is that zoomed in area in the little red box. We're looking specifically at that first spur that's right across where the beach meets the sand here. You can see the gray area is the South Jetty Cap walkway. That's the part you walk on. Down below that you see some water. I've got the beach to the far bottom left. You would be parking at the bottom left corner of this illustration. And then just past where the beach meets the sand on the other side in the channel, you see the gray rocks. The gray rocks are illustrating where the big 5-ton granite blocks are stacked up and they're sticking up above the water. And then the ones outlined in blue are the ones underwater. So of course these rocks extend underwater, and that's kind of the information I'm trying to pass on to you guys. Here is what's it look like underwater. So these rocks, if we'll start on the left hand side of this illustration here, as you go down that rock face, it's a pretty steep angle that it heads down. When you hit the bottom and it kind of flattens out, it turns into kind of clay and shell. It's not really sand or silt. There is a lot of silt down there, but the bottom itself is kind of clayish. It's about 40 feet deep, depending where you're at along the jetty, but on average about 35. You see there's a couple of spots in here that are colored like beige or kind of brown, like a light brown. Those are to indicate there are gaps in here along where all these 5-ton granite blocks are piled up. There's some small areas where there's no rocks, like the rocks just didn't happen to end up there, and it's just kind of silty, sandy. Up in between the rocks, it is kind of silt and sand and not clay. But there are some gaps in the rocks where it's just big open areas of sand. Those are good spots to find flounder for sure. I see lots of flounder laying in there. But when you get to the bottom down at 35 feet, you see the little bitty blue dots. That basically turns into smaller rubble. When I say smaller rubble, I'm talking maybe softball size up to basketball size pieces of rock. And they kind of line the edge at the bottom of the big granite blocks here. Now, kind of moving slowly to the right from the left-hand edge, you see how the gray rocks on the surface extend further out than the rest of the rocks. That's really obvious when you're standing on the jetty and you look, and to your left you can see a spot where the rocks kind of jut out further than the others. That's basically the start of the spur. It's just starting above water, and that kind of just extends underwater like that. That's also a very flat spot. I'm going to have some video in here of me diving on the spur, and you'll be able to see when I first start out, I'm sitting on some very flat rocks, and I can kind of just scoot into the water on my butt very easily, whereas the rest of the jetty is a little bit harder to get in and out because of the angle of the rocks. But I'll start that video kind of right on top of the spur, right where we see the gray rocks pushing further out here. So that goes underwater. You see immediately it's about 20 feet right off the, as soon as it goes underwater. Now that's out on the spur. To the left or right, and you see to the right I have 10 foot. Normally, right when you get off the rocks and into the water, you kind of drop down off this little ledge, and it's right about 10 foot. Then it starts angling down deeper, down to 35, 40. Okay, but when you're on top of the spur, again, these rocks are piled up quite a bit more than they are in other areas. So you get pretty far out there, and you're still only 20 feet deep, where it's 35 or 40 to the left or right of you. Again, because you're on top of these rocks. That extends out. This first one, I believe, extends out at a 30-degree angle. So it's not open very much. It's angled up away from the jetty, but not a whole lot. The armpit, which is the right-hand side on the basically the inside of that spur between the spur and the jetty, is what I would call the armpit. That tends to kind of wallow out, be a little bit deeper in there. But anyway, the spur extends out about 200 feet into the channel at a 30-degree angle to the jetty itself. When it ends out there on the end, again, it's kind of lined on both sides with smaller rubble, all the little blue dots kind of densely packed along the edges of it there. As you approach the end of that spur, way out there, when you start to get close to the edge of the actual channel, on top of the spur, it's probably about 30, 35 feet, maybe 40 when you're on the bottom, right next to the rocks there. There is a little bit of an apron of smaller rocks kind of spread out around the tip of that finger, of that spur, I should say. Now, coming back into that elbow I was talking about, where here on the display it says 40 foot, in that armpit, I should say, the tide tends to wash that out. It tends to be a little bit of a hole there. It's 40 feet. It's a little bit deeper than it would be on that left side of that spur. But you see some larger light blue circles here. So there's some scattered rubble in this armpit area. There's a lot of very small stuff indicated by the dots. The bigger circles are kind of intermediate sized stuff, and it's kind of randomly scattered. Again, this will be in the video and you'll be able to see this. But these are a little bit bigger, maybe a little bit bigger than a basketball, but not quite as big as a 5-ton granite block. And it's kind of scattered out, very sporadic, right? And that's essentially it. You go out on the spur here, you do have to be aware of which direction the current's going, when ships are going to come through, pulling the water out, so on and so forth. Lots of hazards out here, but once you get out on the end of that spur, you kind of start getting away from fishing line, things like that. People generally can't cast out that far. If you're a fisherman, this is also good information for you, because if you get out here and you're standing where this spur is at and you're casting your line out, you're never going to be able to cast and not get hung up in the rocks. So it's beneficial to know where these spurs are at so you can fish in between them and not get hung up quite so much. Now you can see I've added to the illustration here some red arrows. This is going to pertain to the video that's going to follow here of the actual dive on the spur. So one would be starting off, this is where I enter the water from where these rocks kind of jet out here. I enter, go straight down to the bottom, kind of hook a right, where number two, I'm moving along the inshore side of the spur, moving out toward the channel. I'm not quite on the spur. You'll see that I'm on a whole bunch of small rubble and not on the big granite. I get down it a little ways, and then we move to number three, where I kind of hop over the top of the spur. This is a little oversimplistic. In the video. I actually kind of start edging up onto the spur, and I'm slowly working my way onto the top of it as I'm moving out toward the end. And after I move down for a little ways, I kind of just hook right and turn and make my return, which brings us to number four, where I span this gap in the armpit. I'll make reference to that when we get to the video, but that's spanning the gap of the armpit and coming back up the jetty. I would surface right beside where the rocks meet the water. I would not surface out there deep. I would surface right at the edge of the rocks once I'm up about 10 feet. Then once I'm at the surface, I swim to the left until I reach the point where I entered, and I exited at the same location. So cutting straight to the video here, this is me prepping. I am sitting on the spur at the rocks where they're flat. You can see my dive flag right out here in front of me. See the rock I'm sitting on is flat. It's pretty parallel right at the water's edge. As you look down the jetty, those rocks kind of slope at a little more of an angle. I've paused it here so you can see a little bit more how flat the rocks are right here. This is how you can identify that first spur. It's a spot where all these rocks sit pretty low and pretty flat. When they did all these recent repairs to the jetty after the hurricanes, they restacked a lot of new granite blocks in here. But where the jetty spur is at, it's still pretty obvious where that spur is. So I kind of just scooted in off my butt here, real easy entry. Floating on the surface, going to get my gun loaded up, get it ready before I get my head underwater and Sheepshead starts swimming up to me right off the bat. As far as that dive flag, I kind of just throw it in the water from the rocks, get in. When I get ready to get out, I just kind of grab it and take it out with me. Right, so I'm getting ready right next to the rocks here. If there were a wake from, say, boats, ships coming through, things like that, I would recommend get away from those rocks immediately. It's better to be floating on the surface 10 feet away. Even if the current is kind of dragging you a little bit, that's better than getting smashed into those rocks, right? So I've made my descent. You see my line there. That's from a dive flag. You see how the current's just kind of pulling at a pretty tight angle there. There's a little gray snapper I just saw. He's a little small to shoot at. Honestly, I'm a little more worried about the current taking my flag, kind of dragging it off. My weight ended up right on top of a a granite block here that's probably not going to stay there if the current keeps pulling on it. So what I'm doing now is I'm looking for a little hole to drop that weight into. I don't want it to slide off on its own because it could fall into a little gap where I cannot retrieve that weight and it'll kind of get stuck in there and I'll have to cut my line or whatever. But I found me a little hole I could drop that weight into. That shouldn't go anywhere. That'll hold my flag where it's at here. Now that I got that kind of settled out, here I'm indicating that the current is running from right to left. I'm starting my descent. I'm actually headed down the face of all the granite here. Again, I'm already right on top of the spur. I'm already getting close to the bottom here. I'm already reaching the bottom. Notice the big blocks have gone away. It's turning into kind of smaller rubble. This is on the left side. I reached the bottom. I'm on the left-hand edge of the spur as it's going out. You see a lot of that rubble. Now, I want to clarify, too, this small rubble doesn't just line the edges of the large granite blocks. This small rubble is the base of the jetty. All that small rubble was laid out, and then the granite block was brought in and laid on top of all the small stuff. So the small stuff's not just lining the edge of it. It just happens to be the granite blocks are on top of all that small rubble, and it just you kind of see it sticking out on the edges. So again, I'm at the base here, kind of heading out onto the spur just a little bit. A redfish right here kind of scares the crap out of me. That was a good 40+ inch redfish. Kind of came out of nowhere, didn't see him coming, and kind of spooked me there for a second. Something big just kind of swimming by me. It only took me a second or two to realize what it was, but it definitely gave me a little bit of a jump scare there. Again, you can see all the small rubble here. There's a second redfish. Obviously, I'm still in casting range. You see this cork here hung up in the rocks where somebody broke off and lost that float. I'm not sure why the float's connected to the bottom as it is, but obviously I'm not too far out from the jetty. I'm also not too deep. You see all this very bright light shining through the water. That'll indicate that I'm not actually all that deep at the moment. But so already I've been underwater, a minute or two, and I've had 2 big redfish come up and kind of spook me. Now those are just the ones I've seen. I've only seen a very small area for a short amount of time, and I've already seen 2 bull reds. Another one's about to come in right now. You see him kind of pass through there. Very hard to see them on the video. The visibility is not great, and they're kind of right out there on the edge of the viz. But that's 3 big bull redfish already. If I've already seen 3 and I've only been underwater a couple of minutes and explored a very, very small area, just imagine how many of these guys are actually down there. All right, so I'm working my way right now. I'm working my way out on the spur. I'm kind of on that left side of the spur, moving my way out. That's why I'm still on the small rubble. I'm not actually up on top of the spur just yet. You can see some of the fishing line. There's an Atlantic spadefish there. Again, those guys are pretty small. I generally don't shoot at those guys. I'm looking for gray snapper and sheepshead out here. Okay, you see the fishing line in the rubble. I'm definitely not too far out from the jetty. People can literally cast this far. There's fishing line on all of this stuff. Scorpion fish are super common out here. They look just like this small rubble. They'll sit in this small rubble and they look just like another piece of rubble. You got to be very, very careful about where you're putting your hands. Small gray snapper swimming by just there. You see, it looks like I'm headed upwards. I'm moving toward a brighter water, so I'm actually kind of moving up the jetty a little bit. There's a belted sandfish. Those are super common at the jetties. Little brown fish, white spot on his belly. Probably one of the most common fish at the jetties. But again, I'm kind of moving up. I'm on the left side of the spur. I've moved out, not quite halfway out on the spur yet, but I'm kind of moving left to right, and I'm kind of moving up the face of the spur just a little bit. There's a huge mullet here. He was very, very green. He didn't seem too bothered by me. He kind of just kept hanging around, kind of eating on the grass down here. I found that pretty unusual. Solo mullet. Just kind of swam around eating grass and wasn't bothered by me one bit. Of course, there's small pinfish, or what everybody calls perch, swimming around all over out here. This is fair. It's not great. It was good enough for me to go out on the spur, which is way better than an average day. Again, just like in my other video, an average day is, 0 viz. Good would be, 5 foot or more would be fantastic. 3 or 4 would be an average diving day out here. See some of that orange or yellowish? It's probably more yellow. See a shoal of bait here. But that yellow stuff on the rock is actually sponge kind of growing on the rock. You see it there. It's pretty common at the jetties out here. See the shoal of bait? This is out on the spur itself. This bait's kind of using the spur for protection. But again, this is why there's a lot of game fish out here. They're out here eating on these shoals of bait that are trying to hide in the rocks out here on the spur here. There's quite a bit of them. Pretty good little shoal of them moving through here. You see them just kind of everywhere. Again, spadefish coming in to check me out. You see random little gray snapper in the distance here. Again, this is just good enough. It's not great, but it's just good enough. Right. A couple of spades again. They're pretty curious. They'll usually move in close, kind of check you out for a minute or two, and then they'll just kind of move on. There's no limits on those spades. If you want to shoot those spades, feel free to shoot all the spades you want at any size. You are not going to get a whole lot of meat off of them, but again, there's no limit, so you can shoot quite a few. There's a sheepshead there. He was a little far away. He doesn't come out very good in the video. Took a little shot at him. He's kind of far out there, though. He kind of juked the shaft and took a miss on that guy. Again, a couple Atlantic spadefish right in my face here. And I'm kind of starting to move up onto the rocks just a little bit now. Again, those spades, they're not very shy. But I've kind of gotten off the, you notice I'm kind of off of the small rubble. I'm kind of moving up toward my right slowly. As I'm working out toward the end of that spur, I'm working on my way up onto the top of the spur. I'm just kind of barely up on the edge of it. Now, there's a ship coming right now. I've set the gun down. I'm going to kind of fast forward this here. I'm kind of prepping for the ship to come. I'm finding a little spot for me to hide in between the rocks and set the gun down to wait this ship out. It's going to take about 3 minutes for it to fully pass. I'm going to put the audio full here so you can kind of hear this. So I'll stop talking a moment just so you can see how loud the ship is as it's approaching. It will get louder as it approaches. There's a little lane snapper right in front of me I'm pointing at here. There's an L for lane snapper. Those are very common as juveniles at the jetties. So with the ship coming, I'm just waiting it out. I'm not going to try to swim around, especially out here on the spur. It's a little hazardous. I'm going to wait the ship out. I can really feel it now. I said it's close, very close. It's almost right across from me right now. It's about as close as it's going to get. At this point, you can hear the screw chug, 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 chug. Those are the blades of the propeller turning over and over and over and over as the ship passes by in the channel. It's very loud. Every pass of that screw, every chug, that chug, 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 you can feel that in your chest as that ship goes by. And again, I'm still only about halfway out on the spur here. Of course, while I'm sitting here waiting for the ship to pass by, there's a little gray snapper buzzing all over the place, tempting me. Again, I do kind of want to just sit it out and wait for that ship to pass by. Multiple reasons why, not just the current pulling on me, but usually the viz will go pretty terrible as the ship passes by and the current kind of switches back and forth, and it'll kind of churn everything up, and it's real easy to lose your viz in a hurry. Another gray snapper here. I'm wanting to get a shot on this guy. I don't really want to, nail the rock behind him. I'm kind of just waiting him out to see if he's going to swim into a gap where I can shoot him clear of the rocks. Of course, again, spades just kind of buzzing through whenever they feel like it. At this point, the ship's kind of moving away. Again, this little gray's coming here. I'm hoping he's going to swim through this gap in the rocks. He kind of swims down where I can't see him. I'm hoping he's going to come out from behind this rock. Unfortunately, he never does. I guess he doubled back when he got out of my sight down there behind that rock and just kind of disappeared on me. Alright, so looking around here, I'm at 28 feet. I'm out on the spur, maybe halfway, a little bit more than halfway. A little spade there. I'm not quite on top of the spur at the moment. I'm still on the left-hand side of the spur, kind of on the what you would consider the outside of the spur, and haven't quite gone all the way up at the top. That's why I'm down at 28 feet. I'm kind of halfway up the left-hand side of that spur. Anyway, again, gray snapper here. Trying to get him through one of these gaps so I don't bean a rock. He swam out, swam away, didn't really come back. Didn't really get a shot on this guy. I don't think I actually shot anything on this trip. Don't get your hopes up on me really shooting anything. I had the gun with me, but this video isn't about the spearfishing so much as I'm just trying to get you guys some footage of what it's like to be on the spur out here. Here's another shoal of bait. These are Atlantic bumper. They're a bit bigger. You know, they're about the size of maybe like a full-grown menhaden. They don't make great bait. They're super duper thin. You know, they almost like a look down, super duper thin, but pretty small. I've never had any success with them as bait, but they're very, very common out there. You see bait dimpling the surface out off the jetty a lot of times. Very frequently, it's schools of those Atlantic bumper. All right, so green sea turtle here comes in. He doesn't realize I'm even sitting there. Kind of come in. He saw something he didn't really like, kind of curved off and just kind of swam away. See those guys pretty regularly underwater out at the jetties as well. Obviously, it's where they live, so that's where they got to be, right? So again, I'm just hanging out here, kind of half up on top of the spur, and out of the blue, this Atlantic Stingray just comes right over my shoulder. We made eye contact. We kind of scared each other at the same time he took off. It kind of scared me too. He was so close. He literally came over my shoulder. He touched my shoulder and my face as he went over. Another big redfish here. That was redfish number 4. And every one of these redfish are at least 40 inches. These are big bull reds swimming through here. That's quite a few reds to see on one dive. I see redfish regularly. They generally tend to be a little smaller, and I don't see quite so many of them. Again, that was number 4, and I've been underwater less than 30 minutes here. But again, I'm on that left side of the spur. Redfish number 5 coming in here. I'm going to kind of slow this down. You see him moving right to left. He's right in front of this rock here. Just kind of a ghost, just a shadow moving through. The video doesn't pick these up super great. Being there in person, it's a little bit easier to see these things with the naked eye, but only a little bit easier. Okay. But again, I am still on the deeper side of the spur, excuse me, the left-hand side of the spur. At this point, I'm going to kind of speed the video up here. I'm moving up the spur, and I'm kind of at that 0.3 on the photo earlier where I'm crossing over the top of the spur. You see me moving up. It's getting brighter because I'm getting closer to the top of the spur. It's getting shallower. Okay. About here, I'm about as shallow as I'm going to get. I'm right on top of the spur. I'm at 21 feet. Decided my air's at a point now. It's time to head back. You see me flip my console over. I'm looking at my compass. I'm giving it time to settle, trying to make sure I need to head back. I think I'm already heading in the direction that I should be, but according to my compass, I'm 90 degrees off, so I make a hard right, start swimming south. Right here in the distance, see a small gray shadow. Something just took off right there. That looked like a grouper to me. I think that was a grouper, and he wasn't as small. Normally, grouper at the jetties tend to be 10 inches or so, very, very small, not worth shooting. That looked like a decent little fish there. Anyway, I'm in that armpit. You see, now it looks like sand and really sporadic rocks. I'm crossing the armpit, head south back toward the edge of the rocks that make up the jetty itself. These are not small rubble, but they're not granite blocks either. This stuff's kind of sporadic, lots of sand and rock in this armpit here. About here, I've reached the base of the rocks that start now. As I start going up these rocks, I'm actually surfacing at this point. I've already crossed the armpit. I'm at the base of the jetty, and I'm actually headed up now. So that kind of concludes that dive out on the spur. Nothing fantastic, but just kind of give you guys a little bit of video what it actually looks like out there. Those granite blocks extend out there quite a ways. Quite a few more fish out there. But coming up here at about 14 feet, you can tell when you get within 15 feet of the surface, it starts getting very, very bright. A lot more whitewashing of the water from the sunlight here. But ending the dive, coming up, going to unload the gun, pop my head out of the water here, and that kind of concludes the dive. Weather wasn't super fantastic, but looking for my dive flag, I see it down there ahead of me. So at this point, kind of going to clip the gun off, swim parallel to the jetty in the water to my entry point, and then exit again where those rocks are real flat, make it real easy for me to get out of the water. But thanks for watching the video. Hope to see you guys on the next one.